Hi, my sweet friends, and welcome back to Crochet Every Day with Judy. Today we're reading again from Black Beauty, starting with Chapter 11, Plain Speaking. The longer I lived at Birtwick, the more proud and happy I felt at having such a place. Our master and mistress were respected and beloved by all who knew them. They were good and kind to everybody and everything, not only to men and women, but to horses and donkeys, dogs and cats, cattle and birds. There was no oppressed or ill-used creature that had not a friend in them, and their servants took the same tone. If any of the village were known to treat any creature cruelly, they soon heard about it from the hall. The squire and Farmer Gray had worked together, as they said, for more than 20 years to get check reins on the cart horses done away with, and in our parts you seldom saw them. Sometimes if mistress met a heavily laden horse with his head strained up, she would stop the carriage and reason with the driver in her sweet, serious voice, and try to show him how foolish and cruel it was. I don't think any man could withstand our mistress. I wish all ladies were like her. Our master, too, used to come down very heavy sometimes. I remember he was riding me toward home one morning when we saw a powerful man driving toward us in a light pony chaise with a beautiful little bay pony with slender legs and a high-bred, sensitive head and face. Just as he came to the park gates, the little thing turned toward me. The man, without word or warning, wrenched the creature's head round with such force and suddenness that he nearly threw it on its haunches. Recovering itself, it was going on when he began to lash it furiously. The pony plunged forward, but the strong, heavy hand held the pretty creature back with force almost enough to break its jaw, while the whip still cut into him. It was a dreadful sight to me, for I knew what fearful pain it gave that delicate little mouth. But master gave me the word, and we were up with him in a second. "Sawyer," he cried in a stern voice, "is that pony made of flesh and blood?" "Flesh and blood and temper," he said. "He's too fond of his own will, and that won't suit me." He spoke as if he was in a strong passion. He was a builder who had often been to the park on business. "And do you think," said master sternly, "that treatment like this will make him fond of your will?" "He had no business to make that turn. His road was straight on," said the man roughly. "You have often driven that pony up to my place," said master. "It only shows the creature's memory and intelligence. How did he know that you were not going there again? But that has little to do with it. I must say, Sawyer, that more unmanly, brutal treatment of a little pony it was never my painful lot to witness, and by giving way to such passion, you injure your own character as much, nay more, than you injure your horse. Remember, we shall all have to be judged according to our works, whether they be toward man or toward beast." Master rode me home slowly, and I could tell by his voice how the thing had grieved him. He was just as free to speak to gentlemen of his own rank as to those below him, for another day when we were out we met a Captain Langley, a friend of our master's. He was driving a splendid pair of greys in a kind of break, and after a little conversation the captain said, "What do you think of my new team, Mr. Douglas? You are the judge of horses in these parts, and I should like your opinion." The master backed me a little so as to get a good view of them. "They are an uncommonly handsome pair," he said, "and if they are as good as they look, I am sure you need not wish for anything better. But I see you still hold that pet scheme of yours for worrying your horses and lessening their power." "What do you mean?" said the other. "The check reins? I know that's a hobby of yours. Well, the fact is, I like to see my horses hold their heads up." "So do I," said master, "as well as any man, but I don't like to see them held up. That takes all the shine out of it. Now you are a military man, Langley, and no doubt like to see your regiment look well on parade, heads up and all that. But you would not take much credit for your drill if all your men had their heads tied to a backboard. It might not be much harm on parade, except to worry and fatigue them. But how would it be in a bayonet charge against the enemy, when they want the free use of every muscle and all their strength thrown forward? I would not give much for their chance of victory. And it is just the same with horses. You fret and worry their tempers and decrease their power. You will not let them throw their weight against their work, and so they have to do too much with their joints and muscles, and of course it wears them faster. You may depend upon it, horses were intended to have their heads free as men's are. And if we could act a little more according to common sense, and a good deal less according to fashion, we should find many things work easier. Besides, you know as well as I that if a horse makes a false step, he has much less chance of recovering himself if its head and neck are fastened back. "And now," said the master, laughing, "I have given my hobby a good trot out. Can't you make up your mind to mount him too, Captain? Your example would go a long way." "I believe you are right in theory," said the other, "and that's rather a hard hit about the soldiers. But, well, I'll think about it." And so they parted. Chapter 12. A Stormy Day. One day late in the autumn, my master had a long journey to go on business. I was put into the dog cart, and John went with his master. I always liked to go in the dog cart. It was so light, and the high wheels ran along so pleasantly. There had been a great deal of rain, and now the wind was very high and blew the dry leaves across the road in a shower. We went along merrily till we came to the toll bar and the low wooden bridge. The river banks were rather high, and the bridge, instead of rising, went across just level, so that in the middle, if the river was full, the water would be nearly up to the woodwork and planks. But as there were good substantial rails on either side, people did not mind it. The man at the gate said the river was rising fast, and he feared it would be a bad night. Many of the meadows were under water, and in one low part of the road the water was halfway up to my knees. The bottom was good, and master drove gently, so it was no matter. When we got into the town, of course I had a good bait, but as the master's business engaged him a long time, we did not start for home till rather late in the afternoon. The wind was then much higher, and I heard the master say to John he had never been out in such a storm. And so I thought, as we went along the skirts of a wood where the great branches were swaying about like twigs, and the rushing sound was terrible. "I wish we were well out of this wood," said my master. "Yes, sir," said John. "It would be rather awkward if one of these branches came down." The words were scarcely out of his mouth when there was a groan and a crack and a splitting sound, and tearing, crashing down among the other trees came an oak, torn up by the roots, and it fell right across the road just before us. I will never say I was not frightened, for I was. I stopped still and trembled. Of course I did not turn round or run away. I was not brought up to that. John jumped out and was in a moment at my head. "That was a very near touch," said my master. "What's to be done now?" "Well, sir, we can't drive over that tree, nor yet get around it. There will be nothing for it but to go back to the 4 crossways, and that will be a good 6 miles before we get round to the wooden bridge again. It will make us late, but the horse is fresh." So back we went and round by the crossroads, but by the time we got back to the bridge it was very nearly dark. We could just see that the water was over the middle of it. But as that happened sometimes when the floods were out, master did not stop. We were going along at a good pace, but the moment my feet touched the first part of the bridge, I felt sure there was something wrong, and I made a dead stop. "Go on, Beauty," said my master, and he gave me a touch of the whip, but I dare not stir. He gave me a sharp cut. I jumped, but I dare not go forward. "There's something wrong, sir," said John, and he sprang out of the dog cart and came to my head and looked all about. He tried to lead me forward. "Come on, Beauty, what's the matter?" Of course I could not tell him, but I knew very well that the bridge was not safe. Just then a man at the toll gate on the other side ran out of the house, tossing a torch about like one mad. "Hoy, hoy, hoy! Hello, stop!" he cried. "What's the matter?" shouted my master. "The bridge is broken in the middle, and part of it is carried away. If you come on, you'll be in the river." "Thank God," said my master. "You, Beauty," said John, and took my bridle and gently turned me around to the right-hand road by the riverside. The sun had set some time. The wind seemed to have lulled off after that furious blast which tore up the tree. It grew darker and darker, stiller and stiller. I trotted quietly along, the wheels hardly making a sound on the soft road. For a good while neither master nor John spoke, and then master began in a serious voice. I could not understand much of what they said, but I found they thought, if I had gone on as the master wanted me, most likely the bridge would have given way under us, and horse, chaise, master, and man would have fallen into the river. As the current was flowing very strongly, and there was no light and no help at hand, it was more than likely we should all have been drowned. Master said God had given men reason by which they could find out things for themselves, but he had given animals knowledge which did not depend on reason, and which was much more perfect in its way, and by which they had often saved the lives of men. John had many stories to tell of dogs and horses and the wonderful things they had done. He thought people did not value their animals half enough, nor make friends of them as they ought to do. I am sure he makes friends of them if ever a man did. At last we came to the park gates and found the gardener looking out for us. He said that Mistress had been in a dreadful way ever since dark, fearing some accident had happened, and that she had sent James off on justice, the roan cob, toward the bridge to make inquiry after us. We saw a light at the hall door and at the upper windows, and as we came out, Mistress ran out, saying, "Are you really safe, my dear? Oh, I have been so anxious, fancying all sorts of things. Have you had no accident?" "No, my dear, but if your Black Beauty had not been wiser than we were, we should all have been carried down the river at the wooden bridge." I heard no more as they went into the house, and John took me to the stable. Oh, what a good supper he gave me that night! A good bran mash, and some crushed beans with my oats, and such a thick bed of straw, and I was glad of it, for I was tired. Chapter 13, The Devil's Trademark. One day, when John and I had been out on some business of my master's, and were returning gently on a long, straight road, at some distance we saw a boy trying to leap a pony over a gate. The pony would not take the leap, and the boy cut him with the whip, but he only turned off on one side. He whipped him again, but the pony turned off on the other side. Then the boy got off and gave him a good hard thrashing, and knocked him about the head. Then he got up again and tried to make him leap the gate, kicking him all the time shamefully, but still the pony refused. When we were nearly at the spot, the pony put down his head and threw up his heels and sent the boy neatly over into a broad, quickset hedge, and with the rein dangling from his head, he set off home at a full gallop. John laughed out quite loud. "Serve him right," he said. "Oh, oh, oh!" cried the boy as he struggled about among the thorns. "I say, come and help me out." "Thank you," said John. "I think you are quite in the right place, and maybe a little scratching will teach you not to leap a pony over a gate that is too high for him." And so with that, John rode off. "It may be," said he to himself, "that young fellow is a liar as well as a cruel one. We'll just go home by Farmer Bushby's, Beauty, and then if anybody wants to know, you and I can tell him, you see." So he turned off to the right, and soon came up to the stackyard, and within sight of the house. The farmer was hurrying out into the road, and his wife was standing at the gate, looking very frightened. "Have you seen my boy?" said Mr. Bushby as we came up. "He went out an hour ago on my black pony, and the creature has just come back without a rider." "I should think, sir," said John, "he had better be without a rider unless he can be ridden properly." "What do you mean?" asked the farmer. "Well, sir, I saw your son whipping and kicking and knocking that good little pony about shamefully, because he would not leap a gate that was too high for him. The pony behaved well, sir, and showed no vice, but at last he just threw up his heels and tipped the young gentleman into the thorn hedge. He wanted me to help him out, but I hope you will excuse me, sir, I did not feel inclined to do so. There are no bones broken, sir, he'll only get a few scratches. I love horses, and it riles me to see them badly used. It is a bad plan to aggravate an animal till he uses his heels. The first time is not always the last." During this time the mother began to cry. "Oh, my poor Bill, I must go and meet him. He must be hurt." "You had better go into the house, wife," said the farmer. "Bill wants a lesson about this, and I must see that he gets it. This is not the first time nor the second that he has ill-used that pony, and I shall stop it. I am much obliged to you, Manly. Good evening." So he went on, John chuckling all the way home. Then he told James about it, who laughed and said, "Served him right. I knew that boy at school. He took great airs on himself because he was a farmer's son. He used to swagger about and bully the little boys. Of course, we elder ones would not have any of that nonsense, and let him know that in the school and the playground, farmers' sons and laborers' sons were all alike. I well remember one day, just before afternoon school, I found him at a large window catching flies and pulling off their wings. He did not see me, and I gave him a box in the ears that laid him sprawling on the floor. Well, angry as I was almost frightened. He roared and bellowed in such a style. The boys rushed in from the playground, and the master ran in from the road to see who was being murdered. Of course, I said fair and square at once what I had done and why. Then I showed the master the flies, some crushed and some crawling about helpless, and I showed him the wings on the windowsill. I never saw him so angry before, but as Bill was still howling and whining like the coward that he was, he did not give him any more punishment of that kind, but set him up on a stool for the rest of the afternoon, and said that he should not go out to play for that week. Then he talked to all the boys very seriously about cruelty, and said how hard-hearted and cowardly it was to hurt the weak and the helpless. But what stuck in my mind was this: He said that cruelty was the devil's own trademark, and if we saw anyone who took pleasure in cruelty, we might know who he belonged to, for the devil was a murderer from the beginning and a tormentor to the end. On the other hand, where we saw people who loved their neighbors and were kind to man and beast, we might know that was God's mark, for God is love. Your master never taught a truer thing, said John. There is no religion without love, and people may talk as much as they like about their religion, but if it does not teach them to be good and kind to man and beast, it is all a sham. All a sham, James, and it won't stand when things come to be turned inside out and put down for what they are. Chapter 14. James Howard. One morning, early in December, John had just led me into my box after my daily exercise and was strapping my cloth on, and James was coming in from the corn chamber with some oats when the master came into the stable. He looked rather serious and held an open letter in his hand. John fastened the door of my box, touched his cap, and waited for orders. Good morning, John, said the master. I want to know if you have any complaint to make of James. Complaint, sir? No, sir. Is he industrious at his work and respectful to you? Yes, sir, always. He never slights his work when your back is turned? Never, sir. That's well, but I must put another question. Have you no reason to suspect when he takes the horses to exercise them, or to take a message, that he stops about talking to his acquaintances, or goes into houses where he has no business, leaving the horses outside? No, sir, certainly not. And if anybody has been saying that about James, I don't believe it, and I don't mean to believe it unless I have it fairly proved before witnesses. It's not for me to say who has been trying to take away James's character, but I will say this, sir, that a steadier, pleasanter, honester, smarter young fellow I never had in this stable. I can trust his word, and I can trust his work. He is gentle and clever with the horses, and I would rather have them in charge with him than with half the young fellows I know of in laced hats and liveries. Whoever wants a character of James Howard, said John, with a decided jerk of his head, let him come to John Manley. The master stood all this time grave and attentive, but as John finished his speech, a broad smile spread over his face, and looking kindly at James, who all this time stood still at the door, he said, James, my lad, set down the oats and come here. I am very glad to find that John's opinion of your character agrees so exactly with my own. John is a cautious man, he said with a droll smile, and it is not always easy to get his opinion about people. So I thought if I beat the bush on this side, the birds would fly out and I should learn what I wanted to know. So now we will come to business. I have a letter from my brother-in-law, Sir Clifford Williams. He wants me to find him a trustworthy young groom, about 20, who knows his business. His old coachman, who has lived with him 30 years, is getting feeble, and he wants a man to work with him and get into his ways who would be able, when the old man is pensioned off, to step into his place. He would have 18 shillings a week at first, a stable suit, a driving suit, a bedroom over the coach house, and a boy under him. Sir Clifford is a good master, and if you could get the place, it would be a good start for you. I don't want to part with you, and if you left us, I know John would lose his right hand. That I should, sir, said John, but I would not stand in his light for the world. How old are you, James? Said his master. 19 next May, sir. That's young. What do you think, John? Well, sir, it is young, but he is as steady as a man, and as strong and well-grown, and though he has not had much experience in driving, has a light, firm hand and a quick eye, and he is very careful. I am quite sure no horse of his will be ruined for want of having his feet and shoes looked after. Your word will go the furthest, John, said the master, for Sir Clifford adds in a postscript, if I could find a man trained by your John, I should like him better than any other. So, James, lad, think it over, talk to your mother at dinner time, and then let me know what you wish. In a few days after this conversation, it was fully settled that James should go to Clifford Hall in a month or 6 weeks, as it suited his master, and in the meantime he was to get all the practice in driving that could be given to him. I never knew the carriage to go out so often before. When the mistress did not go out, the master drove himself in the 2-wheeled chaise, but now, whether it was master or the young ladies, or only an errand, Ginger and I were put in the carriage, and James drove us. At first John rode with him on the box, telling him this and that, and after that James drove alone. Then it was wonderful what a number of places the master would go to in the city on Saturday, and what queer streets we were driven through. He was sure to go to the railway station just as the train was coming in, and cabs and carriages, carts and omnibuses were all trying to get over the bridge together. That bridge needed good horses and good drivers when the railway bell was ringing, for it was narrow and there was a very sharp turn up to the station, where it would not have been at all difficult for people to run into each other if they did not look sharp and keep their wits about them. We'll stop there for today and start tomorrow with chapter 15. Thank you. Bye-bye.